This is the third video in the Task Sequences 1 module. And in this video, we'll pick up where we left off in video 2, and we will demonstrate using tables to define the actual tasks and the associated secondary resources. So if we pull up our previous model, let's see if I can find that here. There we go, got it. And note, as I did in video 2, I also saved this model under a different name because I'm going to be updating the custom objects, and so I wanted to have that in a separate project. So I start with this model, and the use case that I want to describe is as follows. Suppose that in addition to my operators, I also need additional resources. So think about the case where S1, for example, in addition to a setup operator, I also need a fixture. So I need a particular fixture on the machine. Or maybe I need a particular fixture only for certain parts that go to this machine. So in that case, I need multiple secondary resources, and those secondary resources might not be needed for all tasks. So I might not need the fixture for the cleanup task or something. So what I need is a flexible way that I can define multiple resource requirements. Now, if we look, so let me go back in and add that. So let's just go back in and add a fixture here to get us started. So let's just add a fixture, and we'll just make that a simple resource also. We'll just have one of them. We'll just call it fixture, right? And so if I do that, if I look at that, the question is, well, how do I seize or how do I request multiple resources? So if we look at the server, if we just look at the base server, so let's just drag one out. And if you look at my secondary resource property state over here, you can see that it allows repeat groups. So if I have multiple secondary resources for the entire processing time or the entire task sequence, we can do that with a repeat group on the server. So I can just pick as many as I want. In this case, I could pick operator 1 and I could pick the fixture and so on. But unfortunately, that would be for the entire time. And if I look at the corresponding secondary resources under task sequences, so again, I pick A, open it up, sequence, and then the resource requirements, there is no option for using a repeat group. So it's not clear how I can do this, how I can specify multiple secondary resources. Now, clearly I could go and do an add-on process. So if I can always use an add-on process here and say, okay, when I start this task, go get the fixture. And I could do the same thing, I could have when I start this task, go get the fixture. When I finish the next task, release the fixture and something like that. So with add-on processes, logic like that is possible. But I want to look for a different way. And the different way to do that using task sequences is to move the tasks themselves to a data table. And so that's what we're going to do here and demonstrate how that we can use that structure to have an arbitrary number of resources associated with any task. Here are the modifications we're going to make to our table structure. So you can see that here, the black ones were the ones that we had in the previous model. We're adding two new tables. We're adding a task table and we're adding a task resource table. So with the tasks, we're going to have a primary key of individual tasks. So we're going to have a unique task ID for every task, and we're going to connect those to our resources. So we're going to have a foreign key of the name. I went ahead and made it sname, so because we're only interested in setting up task sequences for our stations. So sname stands for station. And then I'm going to have the task definition columns here. And then associated with each task ID, I'm going to have a set of rows in our task resource table where we have connected to the task ID, the foreign key, and then the specific resource that we need. So let's look at how we can add those in. So go back to our table here. So back to our model. And if I want to add my first table, so the first table that I want to add is my task table. And I could do like we usually do, where I could add the table and then I could go in and manually add those individual components, the task ID and the station name and so on. But I'm going to take a little bit of a shortcut here. And if you go to add table, there's an option here for add table from Schema. So I'm going to choose that, and I'm going to go down here and just pick out the task sequence. And what this does is Simeo knows about the repeat groups associated with all of the objects and the corresponding tables also. And so it lets you construct a table from those components. And so what I want is to construct a table from the task sequence tasks. Okay, so if you remember back when we defined the task sequence, we used the repeat group on the instance, right? So we want that task sequence here, so I'm just going to pick that, task, and then it creates the table called TBL tasks. Now this doesn't have all of the fields we need, and it also has some extraneous fields, but we can easily take care of that. So let's do that. So I'm going to first go to the ID number, the task ID number, and you see these two errors because they have corresponding switch properties. So I can get rid of those by just click on reset and set those values because we're not interested in the switch condition. So we have the task ID number, we have the sequence number, we have the name, we have the branch type, the condition or probability, and then we don't really care about the process name because we're not going to use that option. So let's just click get rid of that. We don't need the immediate predecessors. We don't need the immediate successors. So we have the basic structure that we want. We're just missing two fields. The first field we're missing is that processing time. So let's go and add that property. Here's my expression. We're going to call that processing time. And as usual, we'll specify its unit type as time and its default units as minutes. So we can see, there we go, there, that's added. And then the second thing we need to add, or the next field we need to add, is our connection back to our resources table. So I'm going to go and add a foreign key property, and we're going to call this sname for station name. And the key that I want, column key that I want, is resources name. And let's just move this to the left here. And then I'm going to make my task ID number. Well, I'll make this consistent with what I said in the slide. We'll just call that task ID. And I'm going to make this a column key. So by making it column key, that means I have these unique values. So we have our table task. I'm going to delay doing the task resources table. So let's do that one after a little bit. And let's just sort of go in here and look at building this. So I'm just going to put the first task in. So we're just going to task ID number 1, and let's do this for S1. And now I can define the tasks exactly like we did when we use the repeat group. So I'm going to have sequence number 10. Its name is setup. It's conditional, and the condition is sequence setup time greater than 0. We don't need to deal with the cancel trigger for this one. And its processing time is sequence setup time. Okay, so again, this is exactly how we defined it in the repeat group. I'm just defining it in the table. And let's go ahead and define the other two for S1, and then we'll go look at how to connect these up. So task 2 or task 20 is processing, and its condition is always, so it has no condition, no probability. We need to set this to none. We talked about the auto cancel trigger in the last video. So this is just sequence P time, processing time. And then ID number 3, S1, 30, cleanup. It's conditional. Sequence, cleanup, time greater than 0. Doesn't matter for the auto cancel trigger. Cleanup time. So now we have essentially moved what we had in our repeat group for the instance into our table. The next step that I need to do is now tell the instance, hey, I want you to use this table. So go back to my facility, and we'll just select F1, and here where we have the processing task, here's our repeat group. So that's the repeat group that we essentially just replicated. So we don't need that anymore. So I'm just going to go over it, and I'm going to right-click on processing task, set reference, and I'm going to set a reference to table tasks. You can see now we have the reference property symbol, and when I open it, it's saying, okay, I'm going to tie all of my components to that table. So the sequence number, the name, the branch type, the condition probability, and the auto cancel trigger have all been pulled from the table. The only thing missing is we'll pull this guy, table tasks, processing time. There we go. So there's the processing time. And so now all of these are referring to the table. And so instead of having the repeat group for the tasks, we have the table reference. Now note that we have the connection to the resource. So if I go back to my resources, remember when we did that, when we created this table, we have this auto set table row reference to true. And so what that means when I link here, when I open this, it has a relationship to the task table. And so the net effect here is that when I am executing the task sequence from S1, it's only going to see the S1 values from the table. Where I'm executing from S2, it will only see the S2 values in the table, and so on. Okay, so let's go back here and let's just update from here. So now this is no longer bold, and if I go to S2, of course now it didn't pick that up, so let's see how let's reset this. There we go. For whatever reason, it saw that I had changed that, but when I reset it, it resets the defaults. Let's do this. Processing time. There we go. I don't know why that one didn't pick up. There we go. Let's pick that. Try this one more time. Update from server. And now when we look here at S2, that didn't update. There we go. And now we go look at S3 and its task updated. And this time it picked that value up. So you can see that occasionally when you do update from this, that's why I always go back and look, because sometimes there's confusion as to when a particular property value has been changed. So it's always a good idea to go back and verify. And now you can see that we have all of those values set. And so the last thing we need to do now is go back and define all the rest of the tasks, because we've only defined tasks for S1. So when an entity comes to S2, for example, it sees no tasks, right? It sees no tasks. Now, one thing that we could do in our case, oops, let me close that guy. All of our servers are going to have these same 10, 20, 30 setup, processing, cleanup, right? So we could use one set and not have this foreign key. But for this case, since we want to be able to have those secondary resources, I want to explicitly define all of those. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go in and name all of these. So there's 4, and this is S2, 5, S2, 6, S2. So there's my S2, and then I'll just copy all of these values because we want the same thing. Just Control C, go here, Control V, and now it just copied all of those values. So you can see that we have, except for this S name, the key column, well, and the ID number, everything else is the same. And then we'll do the same thing here for S3. So we do 7, S3, 8, S3, 9, S3, and then grab all these guys, Control C, paste them in here, Control V. And so now we have 3 sets of tasks that are defined by the resource name. Go back here, and there's task ID 1, 2, 3 corresponding to sequence number 10, 20, 30, task ID 4, 5, 6 corresponding to 10, 20, 30, and so on. And so now we've completely defined the task table. So if we go back to our model and then execute the model, so just create the plan, you can see that we have implemented our plan. So we are using, go back and look, and note we haven't done the operators yet. We're going to do that here in just a second, but if you just go, we see the same setup, process, and cleanup, setup, process, and cleanup. Oh, it looks like looks like I didn't multiply by the quantity again. That's the second time I didn't do that. So let's go back to our data and see where that's going on. It's going on right here, sequence p time. So let's modify that guy. So let's reset that to sequence p time times orders quantity. Same thing we did before. Surprising that I did that a second time, but nevertheless, go back in and change that guy. So I'm just resetting these, reset, and then copy the values in. Okay, so now we have the p time sequence times the orders quantity, and when we go back in and rerun, scroll that out a little bit. Yeah, now we're seeing what we expect in terms of the processing. So we have a setup, processing, cleanup, setup, processing. Can't tell if we have a cleanup there, a little bitty tiny cleanup. Setup, processing, no cleanup there. So basically the same structure that we saw before. And so let me make a quick note here again that the importance for having these related tables. The reason this works, the reason, for example, that I can do sequence.ptime times orders.quantity is because when I create an order, that order has a part type. The part type has a part reference. The part reference has a sequence reference. The sequence and also has an orders reference. So we have access to all of these tables through that reference. And that enables us to, at any expression that I want, I can use any of the tables involved in that table relationship. So we are in the tables task, but I also have access to the sequences table row, the order quantity row, I have access to the resource row, and so on. So that's a critically important part of using data tables, both from a data generated model perspective, but also from a data-driven model perspective. Also note here that while in this model, the task sequences are the same, so 10, 20, 30, 10, 20, 30, 10, 20, 30, and they all have the same thing. That doesn't have to be so. So we could put completely different task sequences using the same method, and that's really one of the reasons why we have this connection between the resource, or the station name in our case, and the task sequence, so that we can use that relationship and define the sequence however we want. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we need to tie these secondary resources. So what we've seen is this essentially, the model that we have essentially implements the model that we did back in the first video before we introduced this notion of secondary resources. So we've just basically moved the task sequence, or the task structure, from the repeat groups into a table. So what we're going to do is we're going to define our second table here. We're going to define our task resources table. Oops. And we need to have a connection between the task ID and the resource. So let's go back to our table here, and let's see if I can find it here. I'm going to add a new table, and we're going to call this one task resources. And the first column that we have is a foreign key property. This is going to be task ID. And so we want that to be tied to our task ID there. And then our second column is just going to be the object that we want to have, the resource that we want to have for our secondary resource. There we go. And so those are tied together. So now if we go back and look at our tasks, let's tie these together, and first thing that we're going to do is let's just make all the setup operator 1. So we have let's make sure we have this set up correctly. So we have, oops, I didn't mean to click there. Make that a little bigger. Operator 1, operator 2 in the fixture, we still have that. So let's just go make all of our setup tasks, which are task 1, task 4, and task 7. So I'm going to go task 1, operator 1, task 4, operator 1, and task 7, operator 1. And we'll just leave it at there for now. So we go back to our resources, S1, and so it's task 1 here. Click on that, and now we see the operator. So for server 1 or station 1, it has task 1, task 2, task 3. Task 1 requires operator 1. Same for task 2. Go here, look at task 4. And it also requires operator 1. So we have the initial part of our table set up. Again, we're just looking at operator 1 for the 3 setup tasks. Now we need to go back and say, I want to use those tasks. So first thing I need to do, this is going to be a 2-step process. I'm going to go back to my processing tasks for S1 and specify right here task resource as a referred table name. This is going to be, well, I can just use the pull down group and go to our task resources. So that's the first step, to say I want to use this table. Second step is to go to our tasks, resource requirement, and say this is task resources resource, so the corresponding table. So again, two-step process. One is define that or specify that we use the table here, and the second one then is to go and connect it to the resource requirements in the repeat group editor. Okay, so now let's run. Go back to our planning mode, create plan, and what we see is operator 1 is for the setup here, setup here, setup here, setup here, and so on. So all of the setups in this case are done by operator 1, which is exactly what we were looking for. But now that we have the table structure set up, we can go back in and add any of the arbitrary requirements that we want. So for example, let's say that I want to have operator 2 do the cleanup operations. So we can go operator, let's see, so that would be task 3 is operator 2. Would it be 5? Let's see, 3, 4, yeah. 5 would be operator 2. And 9 would be operator 2. Operator 2, where are you? There we go. So 1, 4, 7 is operator 1. 3, 5, 9 is operator 2. And again, that corresponds to my setup, then my cleanup, is 5, 6. 3, 6, 9, 1, 4, 7, 3, 6, 9. And then when we go back to our planning, generate our plan, now we have our operator 2 is the cleanup here, operator 2 is the cleanup here, operator 2 is the cleanup here, and so on. So you can see once we get the table structure set up, this is really simple for me to add those resource requirements back the way that we had them when we embedded them in the repeat group. When we were doing the repeat group here, we essentially followed the same process, only instead of doing it in the repeat group, we did it in the data tables. So now we can look at requiring the second resource. So let's assume here that station S1 and station S3, in addition to the operators, also need a fixture, our single fixture. And let's assume that when an order gets to S1, the setup operation, puts the fixture or installs the fixture, then the fixture stays during processing, and then the fixture is no longer needed during the cleanup operation. So that would say during the task 10 and task 20, you need the fixture in addition to the operator. So you need the operator and the fixture at task 10. You need the fixture in task 20, and you need the second operator in task 30. Okay, so now we have the table set up, we can easily do that. I need to go back to my tasks and say, I want for S1, I need the fixture for tasks 1 and 2. So I just go back here and say task 1, and I want the fixture. And task 2, I also want the fixture. And then I said for station 3 also, so here's station 3, it's tasks 7 and 8. So for task 7, we want the fixture, and for task 8, we also want the fixture. And so now when we go look at my tasks, for task 1, we need the operator and the fixture. For task 2, we only need the fixture. For task 3, we only need the operator, well, in this case, a different operator, and so on. So you can see that by having this table, we can have this arbitrary number. We simply, if I wanted to have another resource required for task 1, I just simply put another row in my table. Okay, so let's go back and see this. So go back, do our planning, create a plan. There we go. There's our fixture. Where is our fixture? Oh, did I not say? I guess I didn't. Go back to our facility, fixture, auto logging. Always forget that. You probably always forget that too. Go back to planning. And so there's our fixture right there. So reset the guy and then execute. And now you can see let's make this a little bigger. For order 1, we need the operator 1 for the setup. We need the fixture for the setup. We also need the fixture for the processing. We don't need the fixture for the cleanup, but we do need the other operator. So you can see how easy it is once we have the table structure set up to have these arbitrary resource requirements when we have, once we have the table set up, it makes it easy to connect tables to specific tasks. And remember, because we have the tasks set up as individual in a table, we can have these arbitrary task structures. We can also then incorporate these arbitrary resource requirements. So one quick note here, sometimes you'll see, since I have these fixtures, let's try one more thing. Let's put the fixture also in for machine 2 or station 2. So go back to my tasks. Station 2 is task 4 and 5. So let's go add 4 fixture 5 fixture. See if this does it. I don't know if this is going to do it. I didn't do enough testing here, but let's just check this out. So let's go and run and create plan. And it all still looks good. So what I'm looking for here, let me just make a comment since I obviously haven't made it do it, is that because of the fixture requirements and the and the operator requirements, we can get ourselves into a situation where the system is deadlocked. Because think of a situation where we have the operator, but we need the fixture, but the fixture is located somewhere else and it's waiting for an operator. So let's go back and let's say that I have an order on S1 and an order on S2, and S1 needs the fixture and operator 1, and S2 needs the fixture and operator 1. S1 has the operator, S2 has the fixture. In that situation, you can't resolve it because S1 is waiting for what S2 has and S2 is waiting for what S1 has, and so the system doesn't progress. And that's what's called a deadlock situation. And we can prevent that, or we can minimize the chance of that happening if we go back to our task sequences and look at this require quantity constraints, and there's an option here, must simultaneously seize. And so if we set that equal to true, then what's going to happen is you won't get yourself in the situation where you have one and are waiting for the other, because it's not going to happen. It won't seize until, it won't execute the seize until everything is available. And so if you do that, that's going to prevent you from being in that deadlock situation. So I didn't create the deadlock here, so I'm not sure this is really going to do anything. But if I just update the server here, and then I go through the planning process again, then had we had a deadlock, then that would have eliminated that possibility by forcing those instantaneous, or forcing those seize all of the resources that you need. So now that you have the model built, you should go in and experiment with different options, different sequences, different resource requirements, and look at the impact. Make sure you understand the impact on the plan generated by changing those requirements. And if you do see a situation where when you generate the Gantt chart, you see this long bar of a single color where everything seems to stop at a particular time, that's an indicator that you're in one of these deadlock situations. And so you can mitigate that by just going in, as we did, when you go in the task sequence, if you just make sure that must simultaneously seize is true, you can mitigate that possibility. It's also easy for you to add different fixtures, so you can have a fixture for each machine or a fixture for each station or something, and check the impact of that on the model. So again, now that you have the model built, it's time to go away and do some experimentation. And as usual, if you run into any problems, just let me know, and I'll be happy to talk about that either offline or in class. In conclusion, I'm going to leave you with a challenge. So if you look at how we did these resources, the tasks, so the resources are tied to tasks, okay? So the tasks, 10, 20, 30 for S1, 20, 30, 10, 20, 30 for S2, and so on. Suppose that what I have is I have a fixture requirement for a particular part. So suppose part A required the fixture on all of the stations. So that the fixture is not station specific, but it's part specific. What would we do to implement that logic in our current model? So I'll give you a hint, and you should definitely try this. You can achieve this by simply going to the part table and adding a fixture requirement here. So if I added a fixture requirement column here, I could then go back in my task resources and incorporate that into our task resources by linking back to that table. So I'm not going to demonstrate that. This is something that I want you to give a try. I want you to give this a try because it's really important, A, to understand how these table relationships work, and B, how to use those table relationships to achieve a particular goal.